Good evening, Patricia Churchland. Thank you so much for being here tonight in La Repregunta, El Especial.
Such a pleasure to be here.
Well, Patricia, you are a neurophilosophy. What is this? We know what is a neuroscientist and what is a philosopher, but what is a neurophilosopher?
Well, it's a very good question. I think of it as taking the traditional philosophical questions about the nature of the self, about morality, about consciousness, and so forth, and trying to see what we can understand about those phenomena from neuroscience. So it's kind of the intersection between traditional philosophical questions and developments in neuroscience. And of course, the neurosciences are progressing so spectacularly that we are step by step learning a lot about ourselves in ways that are really very new.
The idea is that studying the brain, it is possible to answer these big, essential, and philosophical questions.
Or at least, if not fully answer, I think we can at least make progress on those big old philosophical questions by understanding more and more about the brain.
Why is this? What is happening in the brain that could give us a kind of clue about who we are, what is love, and what is wrong and good?
Yes, those are the questions that have really interested me in the last sort of 10 or 15 years, because we really want to understand sort of the basis of our social nature. Why humans, but many mammals, are intensely social, and why we sometimes make sacrifices of ourselves in order to help another. And it looks like that is a really essential part of being a mammal, that the mother-infant bond, of course, is extraordinarily strong, and often the father-infant bond, in humans at least, is also very strong. And this is kind of like a platform on which other social institutions, other social practices develop.
But there are another current of thought which sustain, for example, Richard Dawkins, and you have written about this, that human beings are intrinsically selfish. So how could you explain that the altruism is part of our brain, for example?
Well, it looks like, of course, all animals, and that includes all mammals and all humans, do need to take care of themselves. That is to say, we have wiring in place to see to our own needs. But with mammals and with some insects, actually, we see, in addition to all that, we see that there is wiring in place so that we care for, help others. So we have both components. And I think Dawkins stressed only the selfish, the self-oriented component. But we are also deeply social. And humans, especially for their family, will take great sacrifices. But this is also true of wolves, it's true of chimpanzees, it's true of baboons.
Patricia, it's a kind of way of thinking, human being and human self, and it is a kind of evolution or change in the paradigm to think the nature of human beings.
Yes, I think that's true, or at least it's a change in the paradigm that has prevailed in Western cultures. It's very interesting that in Eastern religions, for example, Buddhism and Confucianism, they really have a lot in common with this idea that we are social by nature. That is, our brains are wired so that we like to be together, we feel good when we're with others, We need to feel like we're part of a family or part of a group. And the Buddhists and the Confucians, I think, really understood that. And they also realized, as I think many indigenous people did, that our understanding of how to be good doesn't derive from a divine being. It doesn't derive from a God. It's really part of our nature, both to want to be social and to learn the ways of getting along within a social group. And in that respect, we're very much like wolves who learn how to get along as they grow up, but they are born social. They want to be together.
It's interesting, this idea of nature and nurture. I'm going to go back to this in a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
But first of all, for example, a religious person who believes in God and who believes that there is a soul. If this person asks you where the soul and the feeling of the soul comes, what would you say to this person?
I'm not exactly sure what the question is, but I think it might be this, that they might think of the brain as the soul, and they think of their feelings, for example, and their emotions as part of their soul. And that's okay. It's just that what we think now is that there isn't a sort of independent, there isn't a brain independent thing that is the soul. There really is just the brain. Mm-hmm. But the brain is so complex that it's very handy often to think of the mind or the soul as something other than the brain. Because it doesn't, our feelings and thoughts and what makes us laugh, that doesn't seem like it's a physically based thing in the way that we know blood is a physically based thing. Turns out, surprisingly perhaps, but it turns out that it actually is.
It's very interesting. For example, when we think of love, we tend to easily or more easily understand that there is a connection between the feeling of love, this kind of abstraction, because it is in our body. We have butterflies in our stomach when we find the person that we love, when we fall in love, and we understand that this very abstract feeling is connected, is related to our hormones, to our chemistry in our body. But other kind of social feelings, you were explaining altruism, is much more difficult to understand. How is this wired in our brain and in our nervous system?
Well, that's a very good question, especially because although we have some ideas of the elements in the brain that play an important role in those social feelings, there's much that we still don't understand. We do know that certain neurochemicals are extremely important, both for love of another, as when you're in love, but also for love of offspring, and also for love of family. So what we know is that when those chemicals are absent, if they are blocked, for example, that the mother may feel nothing for her children. It's extremely.
You are speaking about mammals or general mammals, or where you are speaking about human beings, mothers, women?
Mammals in general, but certainly human women. We need to have certain neurochemicals in our brains functioning in order for us to feel this strong attachment, this tremendous love for the baby.
Which kind of chemicals are those?
Well, the main ones that are important, first of all, are oxytocin, which is a very ancient, rather simple peptide, actually. But also what plays a really important role are the opioids and the cannabinoids that our brain makes. That is, they don't come in from the outside, but they are made by the brain itself. And the endocannabinoids that the brain makes are released when we are cuddling our babies, for example, or when the mother is nursing the baby, breastfeeding the baby, then these neurochemicals are released and it makes us feel good and we feel wonderful and we feel attached to this baby. But if those chemicals are blocked for some reason.
And for example, if you think of this big debate that is renewing the public opinion related to feminism, many feminisms are against the idea of evolutionary biology because they sustain that this is a way of constrain and restrain their development since they are not, for example, they do not want to be mothers. What happens with men and the oxytocin working in men so as to be in more contact with their children? Does it work in the same way? Biology makes a difference in this sense?
Yes, we think that oxytocin is also released in the brains. Oh, dear me, I'm sorry.
Okay. No worry.
That oxytocin in those animals where both parents help with the babies, oxytocin is also released in the brain of the male. This is true of these little rodents called voles. Mm-hmm. The prairie voles are like that. The males help take care of the babies right from birth. But in another species of mammal, the males may play no role in the infant development and the infant care, and bears are a good example of that. But your general point about feminists who feel that biology is irrelevant, we can, of course, make certain choices in our lives. And if your choice is to not have babies, then that's perfectly fine. But, of course, many humans, and I guess I was certainly one of them, I certainly wanted to have children, and I was strongly attached to my babies when they were born. But I'm a pretty independent woman, and I have a career, and I've been married a long time, but that doesn't prevent me from making choices about the kind of life that I like to lead.
It's interesting this idea of choices and free will, which is another big issue in philosophy.
Yes.
How free will is in some way conditioned and determined by how our brain is wired?
Well, that's a really deep and big question, and it's hard to give a simple answer, but I will show you the way that I think about this question. And that is that, first of all, there is no sharp distinction between having free will and not. It's really kind of a spectrum. Uh-huh. And I tend to think instead in terms of the capacity of the brain for self-control. And self-control, as we know, is learned as the infant, whether it's human or wolf or chimpanzee. Self-control is learned during development as a function of interaction with the world in general, but with other animals in your group in particular.
Patricia, yes, please.
And that is a brain function, and mammals have it in a great degree in which, say, reptiles don't, and that's because we have this massive amount of cortical structure. Mm-hmm.
And Patricia, thinking of all this that you are describing, very interesting. On the one side, you have this brain, very complex human brain, where with very complex functions, not only the survival functions, but also the social functions. But at the same time, each human being is living in a different environment, social environment. And this makes me remember the ideas of Noam Chomsky when he was studying grammar and language, and how the kind of brain device was wired in every human being, but depending on the language that the person faces or was raised in the context of different language, well, this grammar was specified regarding the specific language of the context. Is this the way, the same way that you are thinking that people are different and have different personality because the context, the influence of different contexts makes a difference?
That the infant has this tremendous preparation in the brain for being social. It likes to be cuddled. It likes to be with the mother. And when that happens, oxytocin is released and the endocannabinoids are released and so forth. But it learns social practices as it grows up. Mm-hmm. And of course, because social practices will vary from group to group a little bit, it will learn somewhat different things. But I think the foundation is quite similar across all groups. We all like to feel good. We all like it when others like us. And so I think that is a very common foundation. Most of Chomsky's ideas about universal grammar have been completely undermined by data from many different languages and so forth. And so I don't like to use him as a model for what we're trying to understand in this case. The other thing that's really important in this case, I think, is that we see a very similar pattern across all humans. That is, we tend to like to play games, we like to laugh, we like to be together, we like to do things together, we help each other. The details of complex societies are perhaps a different thing. But of course, for most of our evolutionary history, we have been like that. But the other thing that's different and disanalogous to the Chomsky story is that all mammals are social. He didn't claim that all mammals have language, but all mammals are social to some degree.
Okay.
And how they are social and the ways in which they're social varies as a function of species.
And is there any kind of danger or risk embracing this idea of philosophical question being answered by the way our brain works? In this sense, the idea that just a pill, medication could completely change these wired connections, these wired synapses embedded in our brains, and could change the answers to these philosophical questions?
Well, I think we certainly need to be very careful about messing with brains. But, we need to be careful not just with regard to the idea of directly changing the brains, but also with regard to how kids develop in their culture. Mm-hmm. There are huge cultural differences, for example, between, let us say, parts of China and parts of California. Mm-hmm. And so we want to think about whether or not some of the cultural practices that we grew up in, are those really the best for kids?
Patricia, this idea that education and the way we educate children could affect the way that these wired structures and wired behaviors finally express in society. I'm thinking of racism in the States, which is a huge debate just right now. You say that education, a better education, a more human education, could impact in the way brain works.
Yes, it does. The brain changes as we learn. And the infant brain, the infant cortex changes enormously. It grows neuronal structure and prunes some of it back and so forth. But the growth in cortical structure in the human brain is enormous in the first sort of 4 years of life. And the form that that growth takes is partly determined by the nature of the environment. And the social wiring is greatly affected by the social practices within which the child grows. So yes, I think that paying attention to the kinds of social organizations and social values that society has is tremendously important as children are growing up. And I think parents know that. And by and large, they try to arrange for children to have the best possible chance to have a good, strong, fair social brain.
But the survival dimension of Charles Darwin's theory, it is including this social contact and altruism, or is supposing that human beings are fighting for their lives, no thinking of the consequences that they have in other people?
No, Darwin understood very well that humans are social animals. Mm-hmm. And he knew that also about elephants, about baboons, and so forth, that it is our nature to be social. It is also, of course, our nature to take care of ourselves. So there is this uneasy balance sometimes between self-care and other care. But Darwin understood that, and he understood that there are no simple, easy answers, that just having, say, the 10 Commandments is kind of a rough guide in life, but it isn't often the answer.
Well, thank you so much, Patricia Churchland, for this this kind of travel through these ideas where philosophy and neurosciences meet. Is a very interesting world, the one that you have showed to us.
I think it is. I think it's very exciting.
Thank you so much, Patricia.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.